Derrick Washington, CEO of Technova Solutions, sits handcuffed in an airport security office. His crime? Refusing to give up his first-class seat on SkyLine Airways. On the desk, headlines showing SkyLine stock plummeting by $4.2 billion. Sometimes justice comes with a price tag. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about people standing up against discrimination. The airline never expected what would happen next. The morning had started like any other for Derrick Washington. At 44, he had established himself as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in America. As the founder and CEO of Technova Solutions, a cybersecurity company he had built from nothing but determination and brilliant code, Derrick had earned his place among the business elite. His company now held contracts with numerous government agencies and Fortune 500 corporations, protecting their most sensitive data from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. Derrick's journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in a tough neighborhood in Oakland, he had fought against stereotypes and limited expectations at every turn. His single mother, a hospital nurse, had instilled in him the values of education, hard work, and dignity. Despite attending underfunded public schools, Derrick had secured a scholarship to UC Berkeley, where he worked night shifts at a local security company to pay for his expenses. After graduating with honors, he continued to Stanford, earning his MBA while launching the earliest version of what would become Technova. Education and excellence are the only things they can't take from you, his mother would tell him. Derrick had lived by those words, building Technova from a small startup operating out of his apartment into a billion-dollar enterprise with offices in 5 cities and over 700 employees. Success had brought certain privileges, including how he traveled. First class was standard for Derrick now, not because he craved luxury, but because he needed the space and quiet to work during flights. As the CEO of a major corporation, his time was literally worth thousands of dollars per hour. On this particular Tuesday morning, Derrick was boarding SkyLine Airways Flight 237 from Atlanta to San Francisco. He had spent 2 days in Atlanta negotiating with potential investors and was now heading to San Francisco for a crucial meeting about acquiring a promising AI security startup. The acquisition could potentially take Technova's technology to the next level, integrating advanced artificial intelligence into their security protocols. Derrick moved through Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with practiced efficiency. His tailored Navy Tom Ford suit and Ferragamo loafers marked him as a man of means, though he still noticed the subtle double-takes from some staff, the extra scrutiny at security checkpoints that his white counterparts rarely experienced. After 20 years in the corporate world, these microaggressions had become background noise, annoying but expected. Boarding began on time, and Derrick was among the first to enter the aircraft, his priority status granting him early access. Flight attendant Alicia Miller greeted him with a professional smile. "Welcome aboard, sir. First class is to your right." Derrick nodded politely and made his way to seat 2A, a window seat in the first-class cabin. He stored his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, keeping only his laptop and the acquisition documents he needed to review before tomorrow's meeting. The seat next to him remained empty as other passengers continued to board. He sent a quick text to Jamal Harrison, his COO and longtime friend from their Stanford days. "Boarding now. We'll review the quantum AI projections during flight. Let's connect when I land." Jamal's response came seconds later, "Safe travels. Their tech team is impressed with our security protocols. I think we're in good shape." Derrick smiled slightly. The acquisition of quantum AI would not only boost Technova's capabilities but would also add much-needed diversity to Silicon Valley's overwhelmingly homogeneous tech landscape. Quantum's founder, a brilliant engineer from Nigeria, had built an impressive team that reflected a global perspective. As he settled in, Derrick accepted a pre-flight water from Alicia and began reviewing the financial projections for the merger. The cabin filled around him, the usual mix of business travelers and those who could afford the premium tickets. Derrick barely noticed, absorbed in his work and the classical music playing through his noise-canceling headphones. The peaceful preparation was about to be shattered in a way that would change not just Derrick's day, but the entire trajectory of SkyLine Airways and corporate America's approach to racial equality. The first-class cabin was almost fully boarded when Derrick sensed someone standing over him. Looking up from his documents, he saw a flight attendant he hadn't met before. Her name tag read Jessica Thompson, accompanied by a white man in his 50s, wearing an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. The man looked annoyed, his face flushed as if he'd been rushing. "Excuse me," Jessica said, her voice strained with artificial politeness. "There seems to be a seating issue." Derrick removed his headphones. "What kind of issue?" The man beside her, later identified as Bradley Reynolds, a well-known investment banker, interrupted before Jessica could answer. "You're in my seat." His tone was curt, dismissive, as if Derrick was an inconvenience to be dealt with quickly. "I don't think so," Derrick replied calmly, reaching for his boarding pass in his jacket pocket. "I'm in 2A, as assigned." Reynolds gave an exasperated sigh. "Look, I always sit in 2A when I fly this route. I have status with this airline." Derrick glanced at his boarding pass and then back at Reynolds. "So do I, sir. And my boarding pass clearly shows I'm assigned to this seat." He held up the document, displaying the seat assignment. Jessica looked uncomfortable, caught between two powerful men. "Mr. Reynolds is one of our Diamond Elite members," she explained to Derrick, not meeting his eyes. "There may have been a system error." "I understand the confusion," Derrick said, maintaining his professional demeanor, "but I boarded the plane first, and this is my assigned seat. Perhaps the system issued duplicate assignments. I'd be happy to see Mr. Reynolds' boarding pass to clarify." Reynolds made no move to produce his boarding pass. Instead, he looked around the cabin with growing impatience. "This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this. I've been sitting in 2A on this flight every Tuesday for the past year." "Sir," Derrick addressed Jessica directly, ignoring Reynolds' outburst, "I have an important meeting in San Francisco, and I've already settled in. Is there another first-class seat available for Mr. Reynolds?" Jessica checked her tablet. "We're fully booked in first class today." She hesitated before adding, "Perhaps you wouldn't mind moving to economy? We could refund the difference in fare." Derrick felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a combination of anger and resignation that had accompanied too many similar encounters throughout his life. But he kept his voice even. "I paid for this first-class seat, I was assigned this seat, I boarded first, and I have work to complete during this flight that requires the space and amenities of first class. So no, I would not be willing to move to economy." Reynolds' face darkened. "Do you know who I am? I'm a Diamond Elite member with over 2 million miles on SkyLine. I've spent more on this airline than you've probably made in a year." The racial undertones were unmistakable, and several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Derrick felt eyes on him from around the cabin. "I don't care if you're the King of England," Derrick replied, his voice still controlled but firm. "This is my assigned seat, which I paid for. Your status doesn't entitle you to take a seat assigned to someone else." Jessica seemed unsure how to proceed and called for the head flight attendant. Moments later, Thomas Wilson, a tall man with graying hair and a commanding presence, approached. "What's the problem here?" he asked, looking directly at Jessica, not at either of the men involved. Jessica explained the situation in hushed tones. Thomas barely glanced at Derrick before addressing Reynolds. "Mr. Reynolds, I apologize for this inconvenience. Let me see what I can do." "What you can do," Reynolds said sharply, "is get this man out of my seat." Thomas turned to Derrick now, his expression hardening. "Sir, would you mind showing me your boarding pass?" Derrick handed it over, maintaining his composure despite the growing sense that he was fighting a losing battle. Thomas examined it briefly. "Well, it does say 2A, he acknowledged. "But Mr. Reynolds is one of our most valued customers, and he has specific seating preferences we try to honor." "So do I," Derrick countered. And I have a confirmation showing I selected and paid for this specific seat when I booked my flight 3 weeks ago. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Sir, in the interest of getting this flight underway, would you consider moving to another seat? We could offer you complimentary drinks and extra miles for the inconvenience. Derrick noticed that Thomas continued to address him as Sir while referring to Reynolds as Mr. Reynolds, another subtle indication of the differential treatment at play. No, Derrick said firmly. I'm not moving. I selected this seat, paid for it, and boarded according to all proper procedures. Mr. Reynolds should take his assigned seat or accept an alternative accommodation. The standoff was drawing attention from throughout the cabin. Some passengers were openly watching, while others pretended to be absorbed in their phones or magazines while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Reynolds leaned toward Thomas and spoke in a voice just loud enough for Derrick to hear. Is this really how SkyLine treats its best customers? By letting people who don't belong in first class take our seats? The implication was clear, and Derrick felt his pulse quicken. He pulled out his phone and began recording. What are you doing? Thomas demanded. Documenting this interaction, Derrick replied calmly. Since it appears I'm being asked to give up my legitimate seat based on criteria other than my boarding pass. Recording is against airline policy during boarding, Thomas stated, though Derrick knew no such policy existed. A woman across the aisle, later identified as Zoe Daniels, a marketing executive, had also begun recording discreetly from her seat. Thomas turned to Jessica. Call security. Derrick maintained his composure. That won't be necessary. I'm simply sitting in my assigned seat. I've caused no disruption. You're delaying the flight, Thomas countered. No, Derrick replied evenly. Mr. Reynolds' refusal to accept his actual assigned seat is delaying the flight. Reynolds scoffed. I've never sat anywhere but 2A on this flight. Check your records. A young black woman seated in 3C spoke up. Excuse me, but why is this even a discussion? If his boarding pass says 2A, that's his seat. Period. Thomas shot her a warning look before turning back to Derrick. Sir, this is your final opportunity to move voluntarily before I'm forced to have you removed from the aircraft. Derrick met his gaze steadily. On what grounds would I be removed? I have a valid ticket for this seat. I've caused no disturbance. I'm simply asserting my right to sit in the seat I purchased. Thomas's jaw tightened. The captain has the final authority over who flies on this aircraft, and disrupting the boarding process is grounds for removal. I'm not the one disrupting the process, Derrick stated. This is discriminatory treatment, and I will not voluntarily give up my seat. Thomas nodded to Jessica. Call security to the aircraft. The tension in the cabin was palpable as they waited. Several passengers were now openly recording, despite flight attendants asking them to stop. Reynolds stood smugly by the bulkhead, checking his watch repeatedly. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers, Calvin Brooks and Keith Parker, boarded the plane and approached Derrick's seat. Sir, Calvin said, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us. Derrick looked at the officers, then at Thomas and Reynolds, and finally at the other passengers, many of whom appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Am I being removed from this flight because I refuse to give up the seat I purchased to that man? Derrick asked clearly, making sure his phone captured the response. You're being removed for non-compliance with crew member instructions, Keith stated mechanically. Instructions to give up my legitimate seat based on my race? Derrick pressed. Race has nothing to do with this, Thomas interjected quickly. This is about respecting our loyalty program members. A few murmurs of disagreement could be heard from other passengers. The confrontation had crossed a line that even some of the most privileged travelers recognized as unjust. But it was too late. The decision had been made, and Derrick Washington, CEO of a billion-dollar company, was about to be escorted off a plane for refusing to surrender his seat to a white man who felt entitled to it. Stand up slowly and gather your belongings, Officer Calvin Brooks instructed Derrick, his hand resting on his holstered taser. The implication was clear: resistance would be met with force. Derrick looked around the cabin. Some passengers averted their eyes, unwilling to witness the injustice unfolding. Others stared openly, their phones still recording despite flight attendants' attempts to stop them. In seat 3C, the young black woman who had spoken up earlier shook her head in disgust. An elderly white couple in the second row whispered to each other, the woman's face creased with concern. With deliberate movements, Derrick placed his documents back into his leather portfolio and closed his laptop. "I want everyone to understand what's happening here," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet cabin. "I am being removed from this flight despite having a valid ticket for this exact seat, while another passenger who wants my seat is being accommodated." "Sir, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," Keith Parker, the second security officer, said. Derrick stood, his 6'2" frame commanding attention. "I'm complying, but I want my objection on record." As he gathered his carry-on from the overhead bin, Bradley Reynolds smirked and settled into seat 2A, Derrick's seat, without waiting for confirmation from the crew. Thomas Wilson deliberately looked away, pretending to check something on his tablet. The walk through the first-class cabin was brief but felt eternal to Derrick. As he moved past row after row, he maintained his dignity, back straight, expression neutral. But inside, a storm of emotions threatened to overwhelm him: humiliation, rage, and a bone-deep weariness that came from facing yet another reminder that in America, success and status weren't always enough to shield a black man from degradation. "This is wrong," a voice called out as he passed through premium economy. A middle-aged Asian man had half risen from his seat. "They can't do this." "Please remain seated, sir," Jessica Thompson instructed, her voice trembling slightly. She at least had the decency to look ashamed. When they reached the jetway, Officer Brooks said, "We need to cuff you for security protocols." "That's unnecessary," Derrick objected. "I've complied with everything you've asked." "It's standard procedure for passenger removals," Brooks insisted, though both men knew this wasn't true. Passengers removed for intoxication or belligerence were often escorted off without handcuffs unless they became physically aggressive. The cold metal closed around Derrick's wrists, adding another layer of humiliation to the experience. He was marched through the terminal, a successful CEO in a bespoke suit, handcuffed like a criminal. Fellow travelers stopped to stare, some quickly taking photos. Derrick felt each glance like a physical blow, but he kept his head high. They brought him to a small security office near gate C14. Officer Mason Grant, a stocky man with a military-style haircut, waited inside with a clipboard and a recording device. "Remove the cuffs," Grant instructed after the door closed. "Mr. Washington, I'm Officer Grant with Atlanta Airport Security. I need to ask you some questions about the incident on SkyLine Flight 237. Derrick rubbed his wrists as the handcuffs came off. "I'd like to contact my attorney before answering any questions." Grant frowned. "This isn't a criminal investigation, sir. We're just documenting the incident." "Nevertheless, I'll be exercising my right to counsel," Derrick replied firmly. Grant shrugged. "As you wish. But until we complete our report, you'll remain here, and you won't be rebooked on another flight today." Derrick was permitted one phone call. He dialed Stephanie Walker, Technova's chief legal counsel, who answered on the second ring. "Stephanie, it's Derrick. I've been removed from my flight and I'm currently being held by airport security in Atlanta. I need your assistance immediately." He kept the details vague, aware that Officer Grant was listening to every word. But Stephanie, sharp as always, understood the gravity of the situation. "I'll have our Atlanta associate there within 30 minutes. Say nothing further until legal representation arrives. I'm booking the next flight out." While Derrick waited, Officer Grant attempted to continue his questioning despite Derrick's repeated refusal to speak without his attorney present. The questions themselves revealed underlying assumptions about Derrick's identity and character. "Have you had any alcoholic beverages today?" Mr. Washington? Are you currently taking any medications that might affect your behavior? Do you have a history of confrontations with authority figures? Each question carried an implicit bias, suggesting that Derrick must have done something to provoke his removal, rather than being the victim of discrimination. Derrick remained silent, though his jaw tightened with each new insult disguised as routine inquiry. An hour later, Benjamin Hayes, a representative from SkyLine Airways Customer Relations Department, entered the room with a folder under his arm. Hayes, a thin man with nervous eyes, introduced himself and asked Officer Grant for privacy. Once alone with Derrick, Hayes placed a document on the table between them. Mr. Washington, SkyLine Airways regrets the inconvenience you experienced today. We'd like to offer you compensation and rebooking on our next available flight to San Francisco. Derrick glanced at the document without touching it. It was a settlement agreement with a confidentiality clause and a waiver of all legal claims against the airline in exchange for a $5,000 travel voucher and an upgrade on his next flight. Mr. Hayes, Derrick said, his voice dangerously quiet, do you honestly believe that being publicly humiliated, handcuffed, and removed from a flight for which I had a valid ticket is worth a $5,000 voucher? Hayes shifted uncomfortably. We understand this was an unfortunate situation. Unfortunate? Derrick interrupted. This wasn't unfortunate. It was discriminatory, degrading, and potentially illegal. And I suspect it's not the first time SkyLine has treated passengers of color this way. We categorically deny that race played any factor in this incident, Hayes responded automatically, as if reading from a script. Our flight attendants were simply trying to accommodate a long-standing loyal customer and resolve a seating conflict. By removing the passenger who had the correct seat assignment rather than the one who didn't. That's your policy? Before Hayes could respond, the door opened, and Lauren Phillips, an attorney from Stephanie's network, entered briskly. Mr. Washington, I'm Lauren Phillips representing you on behalf of Walker Legal. I advise you not to sign anything or make any further statements. Hayes stood quickly. This is a private matter between SkyLine and Mr. Washington. Not anymore, Lauren cut him off. Now, my client has been detained for nearly 2 hours. Unless you're formally charging him with something, he's free to go. Officer Grant, who had re-entered with Lauren, looked uncomfortable. We're not pressing charges, but SkyLine has added Mr. Washington to their no-fly list pending review of the incident. Derrick looked at Hayes incredulously. You remove me from a flight without cause, and then ban me from your airline? You realize who I am, correct? Hayes swallowed hard. Your, status doesn't exempt you from airline policies, Mr. Washington. No, Derrick agreed, standing to gather his belongings, but it does mean I have the resources to fight back when those policies are applied discriminatorily. And that's exactly what I intend to do. As Derrick finally exited the security office, his phone buzzed with messages. Jamal Harrison had sent multiple texts. Meeting pushed to tomorrow. Where are you? Flight status shows delayed. Everything okay? Derrick, call me ASAP. The final message had come just minutes ago. Just saw a video of you being removed from plane. What the hell happened? Media already calling for comment. Derrick closed his eyes briefly. The humiliation he'd experienced was now public, spreading across social media, becoming fodder for news cycles and office gossip. But as he felt the familiar weight of injustice bearing down, another emotion began to take its place, determination. SkyLine Airways had picked the wrong person to humiliate. They would soon discover just how costly their discrimination would become. In a sleek conference room atop Technova's Atlanta satellite office, Derrick Washington sat at the head of a hastily assembled crisis team. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but no one was admiring the scenery. All eyes were fixed on the large screen where Derrick's humiliation played out in high definition, captured by passenger Zoe Daniels and already viewed over 3 million times across social media platforms. Play it again, Derrick instructed, his voice calm despite the storm of emotions beneath the surface. I want to catch every detail. Jamal Harrison, Technova's COO and Derrick's closest confidant since their Stanford days, tapped the remote. On screen, security officers Calvin Brooks and Keith Parker escorted Derrick off the plane while Bradley Reynolds settled smugly into seat 2A. "This is beyond outrageous," Andrea Simmons, Technova's chief marketing officer, said through clenched teeth. The normally composed executive could barely contain her anger. "The racism is so blatant it's almost cartoonish." Kyle Rodriguez, the company's chief technology officer, shook his head in disgust. "The comment about people who don't belong in first class should be enough to bury them." Stephanie Walker, who had arrived on a red-eye from San Francisco, studied the video with a lawyer's analytical precision. "The good news, if we can call it that, is they've given us an airtight case. The bad news is that public humiliation can't be undone with a legal victory." Derrick nodded, absorbing their perspectives. "Before we decide our next move, I want to know what we're dealing with. Zoe Daniels wasn't the only one recording. There must be other angles, other footage." "Already on it," Kyle confirmed, typing rapidly on his laptop. "I've got our social media team tracking every upload tagged with SkyLine, your name, or related keywords. So far, we've identified 7 distinct recordings from different passengers." "What's the public reaction?" Derrick asked. Andrea gestured to her tablet. "Overwhelming support for you. The hashtag SkyShameline is trending nationally. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination on flights. Several celebrities have tweeted support. SkyLine's social accounts are being bombarded. And the media?" "Jordan Michaels from CNN has requested an exclusive," Andrea replied. "So have reporters from every major network and publication. Your personal phone number was leaked somehow, we've had it temporarily disconnected and set up a secure line." Derrick absorbed this information, his expression revealing nothing. Inside, he was calculating, planning, weighing options with the strategic precision that had built Technova. "Do you want immediate public redemption?" Andrea asked, leaning forward. "Because right now, the court of public opinion is ready to crucify SkyLine. One interview with the right outlet and you could bring their stock crashing down by morning." Derrick tapped his fingers on the polished conference table. "What do you think? Should I go straight to the media? Comment below with number 1 if you believe I should expose SkyLine immediately, or number 2 if you think a more strategic approach would be better. Like this video if you've ever experienced discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to see how this story unfolds." The team looked at him questioningly, and he waved away the comment with a slight smile. "Sorry, just thinking aloud. But I am curious, what would your approach be if you were in my position?" Jamal spoke first. "You know I'm usually the first to advocate for caution, but this time, I say we hit back hard. They didn't just disrespect you. They revealed a systemic problem that's hurting countless people without your platform or resources." "I agree," said Kyle. "But I think we should dig deeper first. If this happened to you, a recognizable CEO in a designer suit, what happens to ordinary black travelers? There's a pattern here, and exposing the full extent would make a stronger case." Stephanie nodded. "Legally speaking, a class action approach would be more impactful than a single incident, no matter how egregious." Derrick considered their input. "Let's not rush to the media, but let's not stay silent either. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we respond." He turned to Kyle. "I need your team to data mine every complaint against SkyLine related to racial discrimination. Social media posts, Better Business Bureau complaints, lawsuit filings, everything. Find me patterns, statistics, anything that shows this wasn't an isolated incident." Kyle nodded, already tapping notes into his tablet. "Andrea," Derrick continued, "prepare a statement acknowledging the situation without details. Something simple. Mr. Washington is aware of the video circulating online and appreciates the public's concern. He is consulting with his legal team and will address the situation fully at the appropriate time." What about SkyLine? Andrea asked. They've requested a private meeting. CEO Warren Phillips called personally. Derrick's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Interesting. Schedule it for tomorrow. I want to hear what they have to say before we decide our next move. Is a private resolution what you really want? Stephanie asked carefully. Because once you meet with them, it complicates the narrative if we go public later. Derrick stood and walked to the window, looking out over Atlanta. What I want is meaningful change. If that can happen behind closed doors, fine. If it requires public pressure, I'm prepared for that too. But I won't be another black man who's expected to graciously accept an apology and a settlement while the system remains unchanged. A soft chime interrupted the conversation, an incoming email on Derrick's secure line. Kyle, who had access to the account, looked up from his screen with wide eyes. You're going to want to see this, he said, forwarding the message to the room's main display. The email was from Dr. Terrence Howard, a prominent neurosurgeon. Mr. Washington, I was removed from SkyLine Flight 185 last month under nearly identical circumstances. Would like to connect. This isn't an isolated incident. Before they could fully process this information, another email appeared from Professor Layla Johnson, an economist at Howard University. Saw what happened to you. Same thing happened to me on SkyLine in December. Have documentation if helpful. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. How many others? Derrick wondered aloud. How long has this been happening? We need to find out, Jamal said firmly. Derrick nodded, his resolve hardening. Yes, we do. But we need to be smart about this. SkyLine is a major corporation with powerful connections and a vested interest in making this go away quietly. He returned to his seat at the head of the table. We have resources they don't expect us to use. Let's deploy them strategically. Turning to Kyle, he asked, how difficult would it be to create a secure online portal where people could share similar experiences with SkyLine, upload evidence, and connect with our legal team? Kyle considered for a moment. We could have it up by tonight. Secure, anonymous, and untraceable to Technova if that's what you want. Do it, Derrick confirmed. Andrea, once it's ready, find a way to discreetly spread the word among affected communities. No public announcements yet. Stephanie made notes on her legal pad. I'll prepare for potential class action scenarios. And I'll have our team research SkyLine's history, past settlements, NDA patterns, everything. What about tomorrow's meeting with SkyLine? Jamal asked. Derrick's expression was resolute. I'll hear them out. But make no mistake, this isn't about me getting an apology or compensation. This is about changing a system that thinks it can humiliate people based on the color of their skin and get away with it. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Derrick remained at the table, studying the frozen image on the screen, his own face, composed yet tense, as he was escorted off the plane. Behind him, barely visible in the frame, Bradley Reynolds wore a satisfied smirk that spoke volumes about the entitlement that had fueled the confrontation. You picked the wrong person to humiliate, Derrick whispered to the image. And it's going to cost you far more than a first-class seat. Would SkyLine offer a genuine solution, or would they try to buy his silence? What would you do if you were in Derrick's position, accept a private settlement or fight for public accountability? The answers might surprise you as our story continues. The SkyLine Airways corporate headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Atlanta. Derrick Washington arrived precisely 5 minutes before the scheduled 10 a.m. meeting, accompanied by Stephanie Walker and Jamal Harrison. The receptionist, a young woman whose eyes widened slightly in recognition, escorted them to a large conference room on the executive floor. Mr. Phillips will be with you shortly, she said before departing. Derrick took in the room's calculated opulence, the mahogany table, the framed photographs of SkyLine's fleet through the decades, the subtle display of awards and recognitions along one wall. It was a space designed to impress and intimidate, to remind visitors of the company's long history and substantial resources. "They've kept us waiting," Stephanie noted as the clock hit 10:15 with no sign of SkyLine's representatives. Classic power play. Derrick smiled slightly. They forget who they're dealing with. At 10:23, the door finally opened. Warren Phillips, SkyLine CEO, entered first, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the weathered tan of someone who spent weekends on golf courses. Behind him came Diana Foster, the airline's chief legal counsel, and Christopher Allen, SkyLine's director of public relations. "Mr. Washington," Phillips began without apology for the delay, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We're eager to resolve this unfortunate situation." Derrick didn't rise from his seat. "I appreciate your willingness to discuss the matter. Though I'm curious why it took a viral video and potential PR disaster for SkyLine to acknowledge that removing a passenger from their correctly assigned seat might require executive attention." Phillips' smile tightened as he took a seat across from Derrick. "Let me be clear that SkyLine Airways takes customer satisfaction very seriously. What happened on that flight doesn't reflect our company values." "Which part?" Derrick asked calmly. "The racial profiling, the public humiliation, or the retaliatory placement on your no-fly list?" Christopher Allen leaned forward. "Mr. Washington, we categorically deny that race played any factor in the incident. Our internal investigation shows that our staff was attempting to resolve a seating confusion between two valued customers. By removing the customer who had the correct seat assignment." Jamal interjected, his tone incredulous. Diana Foster placed a folder on the table. "We've prepared an offer that we believe fairly addresses the inconvenience you experienced." She slid the document toward Derrick. "SkyLine is prepared to offer you lifetime Diamond Elite status, a travel credit of $50,000, and a formal apology from our CEO, to be delivered privately." Stephanie didn't touch the folder. "And in exchange?" "A standard confidentiality agreement and release of all claims," Foster replied smoothly. "We'd like to put this misunderstanding behind us and move forward positively." Derrick studied Phillips' face. "You consider what happened a misunderstanding?" "Perhaps that's not the right word," Phillips conceded. "An unfortunate incident that escalated unnecessarily." "Unnecessarily," Derrick repeated. "Mr. Phillips, do you have any idea how many African American passengers have been removed from SkyLine flights under similar circumstances in the past year alone?" Phillips glanced at Foster before responding. "I don't have those specific metrics at hand." 27, Derrick stated flatly. "Compared to 3 white passengers removed from their assigned seats during the same period. Would you call that a coincidence?" Allen's expression darkened. "Where did you get those numbers?" "That's proprietary company information." Derrick ignored the question. "We've also identified a pattern of complaints from minority passengers about discriminatory treatment on SkyLine flights that were systematically dismissed or buried by your customer relations department." Foster's professional demeanor slipped momentarily. "Mr. Washington, if you've somehow accessed confidential SkyLine data, that could constitute a serious legal violation." Stephanie smiled coolly. "Are you threatening my client, Ms. Foster? Because that would be an interesting strategy given the circumstances." Phillips raised his hands in a placating gesture. "No one is threatening anyone. We're here to resolve this matter amicably." He turned to Derrick. "Mr. Washington, you're a businessman. You understand the value of pragmatic solutions. The offer before you is generous by any standard." "It's not about money," Derrick replied. "It's about accountability and systemic change. The 27 people I mentioned. They didn't have the platform or resources to fight back when SkyLine discriminated against them. I do. What exactly are you looking for?" Phillips asked, his genial facade beginning to crack. Derrick leaned forward. "A comprehensive overhaul of SkyLine's training and policies regarding passenger treatment, with specific attention to eliminating racial bias." Independent monitoring of compliance for 5 years. A public acknowledgement of the pattern of discrimination and commitment to change. And compensation not just for me, but for every passenger who has experienced similar treatment. The SkyLine executives exchanged glances. Foster was the first to respond. What you're asking for would cost millions and constitute an admission of systematic discrimination that simply doesn't exist. It's a non-starter. Then we have nothing more to discuss, Derrick said, rising from his seat. Stephanie, Jamal, let's go. Wait, Phillips said quickly. Let's not be hasty. Perhaps there's a middle ground. Derrick paused. I'm listening. We could enhance our diversity training program, Phillips offered. And perhaps increase the settlement offer substantially. You're still not understanding me, Derrick replied. This isn't a negotiation for a bigger payout. It's a demand for meaningful change. As they prepared to leave, Allen made one final attempt. Mr. Washington, consider carefully before you take this public. SkyLine has relationships throughout the business world. Your company relies on partnerships that could be affected if this becomes adversarial. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Derrick smiled without warmth. Mr. Allen, I built my company facing barriers you can't imagine. If you think veiled threats will deter me, you fundamentally misunderstand who you're dealing with. As they exited the building, Jamal's phone buzzed with an alert. He checked the screen and stopped walking. Derrick, you need to see this. He handed over his phone, displaying an email from Kyle Rodriguez marked urgent. Found something big. SkyLine internal emails show systematic VIP preference policy that disproportionately impacts minority passengers. Also, Bradley Reynolds is connected to Franklin Aerospace, one of our biggest competitors for the Pentagon cybersecurity contract. This wasn't random. Derrick read the message twice, the implications sinking in. They targeted me specifically. It gets worse, Jamal said, scrolling to show another message. Kyle says SkyLine's parent company, Vista Holdings, just increased their stake in Franklin Aerospace last month. There's a financial connection. Stephanie, reading over Derrick's shoulder, inhaled sharply. This changes everything. If we can prove they targeted you to benefit a competitor. Derrick handed the phone back to Jamal, his expression hardening. Find out everything about these connections. And Stephanie, prepare for war. They had their chance for a reasonable resolution. That evening, Derrick returned to his Atlanta hotel suite to find signs of intrusion, subtle but unmistakable to someone with his security background. A lamp slightly out of position. A dresser drawer not fully closed. His laptop, though password protected, showing signs of attempted access. He immediately called hotel security and Kyle Rodriguez, who dispatched Technova's cybersecurity team. A thorough sweep revealed sophisticated surveillance devices planted in the suite and confirmed that someone had attempted to breach his laptop. Most alarmingly, the acquisition documents for Quantum AI were missing from his briefcase, documents that detailed proprietary technology that would give Technova a significant edge in government contracts. This goes beyond a seating dispute, Stephanie said when informed of the break-in. They're playing corporate espionage. The next morning, Derrick received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end identified herself as Naomi West, an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Tribune. Mr. Washington, I've been investigating SkyLine Airways for months, specifically, their security contracts and connections to defense industry players. What happened to you fits a pattern I've been tracking. I think we should talk. Derrick arranged to meet her at a secure location. Naomi arrived with a thick folder of documents and a determined expression. SkyLine isn't just an airline, she explained, spreading photographs and reports across the table. They're a key player in a network of companies with significant defense and security contracts. Your removal from that flight wasn't about a seat, it was about delaying your meeting in San Francisco and accessing your files. She pushed forward an internal memo with SkyLine's letterhead. This is a list of persons of interest that SkyLine Security has been instructed to monitor and, when possible, delay. Your name was added 3 weeks ago, right after Technova announced it was bidding on the Pentagon's new cybersecurity infrastructure. Derrick studied the document, recognizing several names of competitors and industry innovators. How did you get this? I have sources inside SkyLine who are uncomfortable with how the company operates, Naomi replied. And I'm not the only one investigating. The Justice Department has an ongoing antitrust probe into Vista Holdings, though it's been moving slowly due to political connections. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Derrick realized that what had seemed like an isolated incident of racism was actually part of a larger, more insidious pattern, one that merged racial bias with corporate corruption. That night, after ensuring his new hotel room was secure, Derrick called an emergency meeting with his executive team via encrypted video conference. The time for private resolution has passed, he told them. Tomorrow, we go public with everything, the discrimination, the corporate espionage, all of it. Andrea Simmons nodded in agreement. I've already prepared a comprehensive media strategy. We'll lead with your personal experience, backed by data on SkyLine's pattern of discrimination, then reveal the corporate corruption angle. Kyle added, our secure portal has already collected testimonials from over 40 former SkyLine passengers and several current employees willing to speak out. The evidence is overwhelming. Derrick took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. This would not only be a fight for his own dignity but for accountability in an industry where discrimination had been normalized and weaponized for corporate gain. Let's do it, he confirmed. SkyLine Airways is about to learn a very expensive lesson about the cost of discrimination. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Grand Ballroom of the Four Seasons Atlanta. By 9:15, the room was already at capacity, with journalists from every major network and publication jostling for position. The story had captured national attention, a black CEO humiliated and removed from his rightful seat, now prepared to tell his side of the story. Behind the scenes, Derrick Washington reviewed his remarks one final time with Andrea Simmons. They had crafted a statement that balanced personal experience with broader implications, emotional impact with factual precision. Remember, Andrea advised, stay on message no matter how they try to divert you. This isn't just about one incident, it's about systematic discrimination and corporate corruption. Derrick nodded, adjusting his tie. I've faced tougher crowds than this. At precisely 10 a.m., Derrick stepped onto the podium, flanked by Stephanie Walker and Jamal Harrison. The room fell silent as cameras flashed and video recorders captured his composed, determined expression. Good morning, he began. 3 days ago, I boarded SkyLine Airways Flight 237 from Atlanta to San Francisco. I had a confirmed first-class seat assignment, which I had selected and paid for. Despite having the correct boarding pass and being seated in my assigned seat, I was removed from the aircraft at the request of a white passenger who wanted my seat, with the full cooperation of SkyLine staff. Derrick paused, letting the facts settle before continuing. I was publicly humiliated, handcuffed, and escorted through the terminal like a criminal. My only offense was refusing to surrender my legitimate seat based on another passenger's sense of entitlement. He gestured to a large screen behind him, which began playing the complete, unedited video captured by passenger Zoe Daniels. The footage was more damning than the clips that had circulated online. Showing Bradley Reynolds' dismissive comments, Thomas Wilson's immediate bias, and the security officer's unnecessary use of handcuffs. When the video ended, Derrick continued, what happened to me was not an isolated incident. Through our investigation, we have documented 47 similar cases over the past 18 months, in which passengers of color were removed from SkyLine flights for dubious reasons, often to accommodate white passengers. A murmur rippled through the assembled journalists. But this story goes deeper than discrimination, troubling as that is, Derrick revealed. We have uncovered evidence suggesting that my removal was part of a corporate espionage effort. He detailed the connections between SkyLine's parent company, Vista Holdings, and Franklin Aerospace, Technova's chief competitor for a major Pentagon cybersecurity contract. He explained the break-in at his hotel room and the theft of confidential acquisition documents. This wasn't just about a seat, Derrick concluded. It was about using racial bias as a tool in corporate warfare, a calculated attempt to delay my business activities and access proprietary information. The Q&A session that followed was intense. Journalists peppered Derrick with questions about the evidence, his response, and his plans moving forward. "Mr. Washington, what are you seeking from SkyLine Airways?" asked a reporter from the Washington Post. "Accountability and systemic change," Derrick replied firmly. "We are filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all passengers who have experienced similar discrimination. We are also calling for a federal investigation into the apparent corporate espionage and anti-competitive practices." Within hours of the press conference, #SkyShameline was the top trending topic on every social media platform. Andrea Simmons' team had launched a coordinated campaign, inviting other victims of airline discrimination to share their stories. The response was overwhelming, thousands of posts from people who had experienced similar treatment, not just from SkyLine but from airlines across the industry. SkyLine Airways' response came late that afternoon, a tersely worded statement denying all allegations and characterizing Derrick's claims as defamatory and without merit. The company announced it would vigorously defend itself against these baseless accusations. That evening, Derrick received a call from Jamal, who had been monitoring the situation from Technova's headquarters. "They're playing hardball," Jamal reported. "SkyLine has hired Blackwood PR, the crisis management firm that specializes in corporate reputation salvage. And we're getting reports that they're pressuring some of our government clients to reconsider their contracts with us." Derrick had anticipated this move. "How bad is it?" "Two agencies have already requested meetings to review our security protocols. It's obvious someone's leaning on them. And our banking relationships?" Jamal hesitated. "There's movement there too. Atlas Financial is reassessing our credit facility, in light of recent volatility." Derrick understood the implications. SkyLine and its powerful parent company were using their extensive connections to apply pressure on Technova's business relationships, attempting to force Derrick to back down. "They're trying to strangle us financially," Derrick observed calmly. "Have Kyle accelerate our contingency plan." The contingency plan was already in motion. Kyle Rodriguez had assembled a team of Technova's top ethical hackers to dig deeper into SkyLine's internal systems, not to breach them illegally, but to identify vulnerabilities that might contain evidence of wrongdoing, which could then be properly subpoenaed through legal channels. By morning, the battle had escalated further. SkyLine had launched a counter-campaign, featuring testimonials from minority employees praising the company's inclusive culture. Anonymous sources began feeding stories to friendly media outlets questioning Derrick's character and business practices. A particularly vicious piece in the Financial Observer suggested that Technova had been struggling financially and implied that Derrick's allegations were a publicity stunt designed to distract from the company's troubles. The article cited internal documents that had clearly been selectively leaked to damage Technova's reputation. Meanwhile, Derrick discovered that his personal assets had been frozen due to a temporary restraining order filed by SkyLine, claiming potential liability for defamatory statements causing measurable harm to shareholder value. "They're playing every dirty trick in the book," Stephanie observed as the executive team gathered to assess the situation. "The good news is that they're clearly terrified. You don't respond this aggressively unless you know you're vulnerable." The confrontation took a physical turn that weekend at the National Business Leadership Conference in Chicago. Derrick had been invited months earlier to deliver a keynote address on cybersecurity innovation. As he entered the venue, he came face to face with Bradley Reynolds, the man who had taken his seat on the SkyLine flight. Reynolds, apparently emboldened by liquid courage from the open bar, approached Derrick with a sneer. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame, Washington? Some of us built our success without playing the race card." Derrick maintained his composure. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you walk away before you embarrass yourself further." You think you're untouchable now, Reynolds continued, his voice rising. But when this blows over, you'll find a lot of doors closed to you. Some people don't forget when you step out of your place. The mask had slipped, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath Reynolds' corporate veneer. Several onlookers had begun recording the interaction on their phones. My place? Derrick replied, his voice steady but carrying enough to be heard by those nearby. My place is wherever my ticket says it is, Mr. Reynolds. Just like anyone else's. Security intervened before Reynolds could respond further, escorting him from the event. By morning, video of the confrontation had gone viral, adding another dimension to the unfolding story and further damaging SkyLine's attempts to deny racial bias. The pressure of being thrust into the spotlight was taking its toll on Derrick's personal life. His relationship with girlfriend Sophia Martinez, a professor of international business at Emory University, became strained as media scrutiny intensified. Reporters had begun camping outside her apartment and calling her university office, hoping for insights into Derrick's character. I support what you're doing, Sophia told him during a rare quiet moment together, but I didn't sign up to have my lectures interrupted by journalists asking if you've ever shown signs of aggression or instability. Derrick understood her frustration. This will pass, Sophia. Once the lawsuit is filed. Will it? She interrupted. Or will it just evolve into the next battle? You've become a symbol now, Derrick. That doesn't end with one victory. She wasn't wrong. The fight against SkyLine had expanded beyond the original incident. Derrick was now receiving hundreds of messages daily from people sharing their experiences of discrimination and seeking his help or advice. The burden of these expectations weighed heavily on him. His health began to suffer as well. The stress manifested in migraines and insomnia, issues Derrick had battled earlier in his career but had managed to overcome. Now they returned with a vengeance, leaving him exhausted during the day and restless at night. Yet amid these challenges, unexpected allies emerged. Current and former SkyLine employees began reaching out through the secure portal Kyle had established, providing crucial insider information. One of the most valuable contacts was Tiffany Clark, a former flight attendant who had been terminated after filing complaints about discriminatory practices. It wasn't just individual crew members, Tiffany explained during a confidential meeting with Derrick and Stephanie. It was company policy. We were explicitly trained to give preferential treatment to certain passengers, even if it meant inconveniencing others. The criteria were never stated officially, but the implications were clear from the examples used in training. Tiffany provided training materials and email exchanges that substantiated her claims. More importantly, she was willing to testify publicly. A courageous decision given SkyLine's demonstrated willingness to retaliate against critics. Armed with mounting evidence and growing public support, Derrick's team prepared to take their fight to the next level. The counterattack against SkyLine's corporate wall had begun in earnest, and the cracks were already beginning to show. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia buzzed with anticipation as Stephanie Walker strode confidently through the oak doors of Courtroom 4B. Behind her walked Derrick Washington, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression serious but unintimidated. They were followed by a team of 6 additional attorneys from Walker Legal, each carrying briefcases loaded with evidence and precedents. Today marked the formal filing of Washington v. SkyLine Airways, a class action lawsuit representing not just Derrick but 42 other plaintiffs who had experienced similar discrimination on SkyLine flights. The complaint alleged systematic racial bias in passenger treatment, violations of civil rights laws, and corporate-sanctioned policies that disproportionately harmed minority travelers. On the courthouse steps, a phalanx of reporters awaited their emergence. Stephanie had prepared a brief statement, carefully worded to address the legal merits without inflaming public opinion unnecessarily. But the mere filing of the lawsuit had already made headlines across the country. Today, we've taken the first step toward holding SkyLine Airways accountable for a pattern of discriminatory practices that has persisted for years, Stephanie told the assembled media. The evidence we've gathered demonstrates that what happened to Mr. Washington was not an isolated incident but part of a corporate culture that devalues the dignity and rights of passengers of color. Across town, in SkyLine's corporate headquarters, a different kind of meeting was taking place. The company had assembled its own legal dream team, led by renowned defense attorney Victor Blackwell. SkyLine CEO Warren Phillips paced nervously as Blackwell outlined their strategy. The key is to isolate Washington's incident from the others, Blackwell explained. We'll argue that each situation had unique circumstances that justified the crew's actions. We'll challenge class certification vigorously. Diana Foster, SkyLine's chief counsel, looked skeptical. And the internal documents? The training materials that Tiffany Clark provided? Blackwell waved dismissively. Employee grievances from a disgruntled former flight attendant. We'll paint her as unreliable and biased. Besides, the judge assigned to the case is Samuel Waters. He's historically business-friendly. Indeed, Judge Waters' assignment to the case had been a stroke of fortune for SkyLine. Known for his conservative rulings and skepticism toward discrimination claims, Waters had previously dismissed several high-profile civil rights cases at the summary judgment stage. The first hearing, scheduled for 3 weeks after the filing, confirmed SkyLine's hopes. Judge Waters appeared openly dubious of the plaintiff's claims, interrupting Stephanie Walker frequently and allowing SkyLine's attorneys significant latitude in their arguments. Your Honor, Stephanie argued, the statistical evidence alone shows a clear pattern. Black passengers on SkyLine flights are 8 times more likely to be involuntarily removed than white passengers, even when controlling for all other factors. Statistics can be manipulated, Counselor, Judge Waters responded. I'm more interested in the specific circumstances of each alleged incident. After the hearing, Derrick expressed his concerns to Stephanie. He's not even trying to appear impartial. Stephanie nodded grimly. I had my suspicions, but this confirms it. We need to look deeper into Judge Waters. Kyle Rodriguez's team began investigating the judge's background and connections. Within days, they uncovered troubling links. Judge Waters' brother-in-law sat on the board of Vista Holdings, SkyLine's parent company. More concerning, the judge had received multiple all-expenses-paid trips to judicial conferences at luxury resorts, sponsored by foundations with ties to Vista. This is grounds for recusal, Stephanie declared when presented with the evidence. He should have disclosed these conflicts immediately. Filing a motion for recusal was risky, judges rarely appreciated having their impartiality questioned. But the alternative was proceeding before a judge who appeared predetermined to rule against them. Stephanie drafted the motion herself, presenting the evidence in the most respectful terms possible while making it clear that continuing under these circumstances would taint any verdict. The motion created a minor sensation in legal circles. Judge Waters initially fought the recusal vigorously, denying any conflict of interest. But as media attention intensified and ethics experts began weighing in on television, pressure mounted. Finally, the chief judge of the district intervened, reassigning the case to Judge Elaine Chow, a respected jurist known for her meticulous attention to evidence and procedural fairness. With Judge Waters off the case, SkyLine's legal strategy required adjustment. Victor Blackwell shifted focus, attempting to limit discovery and delay proceedings through procedural maneuvers. But Judge Chow proved less susceptible to these tactics, consistently ruling in favor of broad discovery of SkyLine's internal documents and communications. They're buying time, Stephanie explained to Derrick after a particularly contentious hearing. Their goal is to drag this out until public interest wanes and the financial pressure forces us to settle. Derrick remained resolute. They don't understand that this isn't about money for me. This is about changing how corporations think they can treat people. The discovery process revealed a trove of damning evidence. Internal emails showed SkyLine executives discussing the passenger comfort issue when minority travelers were seated in first class. Training materials instructed flight attendants on how to prioritize the overall customer experience, with examples that invariably involved accommodating complaints from white passengers at the expense of minorities. Most shocking was a recording from a SkyLine training session where an instructor explicitly told new flight attendants, "Let's be real. Some of our high-value customers feel uncomfortable with certain types of people in the premium cabins. Your job is to manage the environment for maximum satisfaction of our best customers." When this recording became public through court filings, SkyLine's PR strategy collapsed. The company issued a statement claiming the instructor had been speaking against policy and had been terminated, only for Technova's team to discover that the same instructor had actually been promoted twice since the recorded session. The case seemed to be building momentum when a serious setback occurred. Tiffany Clark, the former flight attendant whose testimony and documents were central to establishing the systematic nature of SkyLine's discrimination, disappeared 3 days before her scheduled deposition. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Derrick demanded when Stephanie called with the news. "She's not at her apartment. Her phone is going straight to voicemail. Her sister hasn't heard from her in 2 days," Stephanie explained. "We've filed a police report, but given the timing." The implication was clear. SkyLine, or someone acting on their behalf, may have intimidated or even harmed their key witness. Kyle Rodriguez's security team sprang into action, using Technova's resources to trace Tiffany's last known movements. They discovered she had purchased a bus ticket to Savannah using cash, then checked into a motel under a false name. Within 24 hours, they had located her hiding in a small coastal town in Georgia. "I received a package," Tiffany explained when Derrick and Stephanie reached her. "Photos of me entering my apartment, walking to work, visiting my sister. And a note saying accidents happen to people who can't keep company secrets." Derrick was furious. "This crosses every line. We need to bring this to Judge Chow immediately." "We can't prove SkyLine is behind it," Stephanie cautioned. "And making accusations without evidence could backfire. Then we protect Tiffany and make sure her testimony is preserved," Derrick decided. "Kyle can arrange security and a safe location until the deposition." With Tiffany secured in a protected location, her video deposition was taken and filed under seal. Her first-hand account of SkyLine's discriminatory practices, backed by documents she had preserved, provided the breakthrough the case needed. Judge Chow ruled that the plaintiffs had established sufficient evidence of systematic discrimination to proceed to trial. SkyLine's legal team, recognizing the deteriorating position, made their first serious settlement offer, $75 million to resolve all claims, with a confidentiality provision and no admission of wrongdoing. Stephanie presented the offer to Derrick and the other named plaintiffs in a secure conference room at Walker Legal's offices. "It's substantial," she acknowledged. "Divided among the plaintiffs, it would provide significant compensation. And realistically, it's more than we might get at trial, even with a favorable verdict." Derrick looked around at the other plaintiffs. The doctor who had missed his daughter's wedding because he was removed from a flight, the college professor humiliated in front of her students, the retired military officer who had served his country for 20 years only to be treated like a criminal by SkyLine. Their experiences reflected his own, but most lacked the resources and platform he possessed. "What does everyone think?" Derrick asked, genuinely interested in their perspectives. Dr. Terrence Howard spoke first. "The money would be nice, but the confidentiality clause means nothing changes. SkyLine makes this go away, tweaks a few policies for show, and in 6 months, they're back to the same practices." Professor Layla Johnson nodded in agreement. "I didn't join this lawsuit for a payout. I joined because what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else." One by one, the plaintiffs expressed similar sentiments. While the financial compensation would be welcome, what they truly sought was meaningful, verifiable change in how SkyLine, and by extension, other airlines, treated passengers of color. Derrick turned to Stephanie. "Reject the offer. Tell them we're interested in settlement discussions only if they include structural changes, independent monitoring, and public accountability." SkyLine's response was swift and aggressive. They withdrew the settlement offer and instead filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the plaintiffs had failed to establish a legally cognizable claim of discrimination. In public statements, the company characterized the lawsuit as a shakedown by opportunists seeking to capitalize on social justice trends. The turning point came during a pretrial hearing when Stephanie Walker revealed her final piece of evidence. A recording secretly made by another SkyLine employee, Jessica Thompson, the flight attendant who had been present during Derrick's removal from the aircraft. Jessica had been troubled by the incident and had begun documenting similar situations afterward. Her recording captured Thomas Wilson, the head flight attendant, instructing crew members before a flight, "Remember the Bradley Reynolds protocol. If he wants a seat, it doesn't matter who's sitting there or what their boarding pass says. Make it happen." This explicit confirmation of preferential treatment for white passengers, regardless of their actual seat assignments, directly contradicted SkyLine's public statements and sworn testimony. Judge Chow ordered an immediate investigation into potential perjury by SkyLine executives who had denied such practices under oath. Facing the prospect of criminal charges for perjury and growing evidence of systematic discrimination, SkyLine's legal position crumbled. Their attorneys requested an emergency settlement conference, signaling their readiness to discuss substantive changes along with financial compensation. The legal battlefield had proven challenging and at times dangerous, but through perseverance, strategic thinking, and the courage of witnesses like Tiffany Clark and Jessica Thompson, Derrick and his fellow plaintiffs had forced a powerful corporation to confront its discriminatory practices. The path to justice remained complicated, but for the first time, real accountability seemed within reach. As the legal battle intensified in the courtroom, a different kind of revolution was unfolding in the court of public opinion. The video of Derrick Washington being removed from his rightful seat had struck a nerve that resonated far beyond the initial incident, igniting a movement that caught even Technova's experienced marketing team by surprise. Andrea Simmons had expected the #SkyShameline hashtag to gain traction, but she hadn't anticipated the tsunami of personal stories that followed. Thousands of travelers began sharing their own experiences of discrimination, not just on SkyLine but across the airline industry and beyond. What had started as one man's stand against injustice had evolved into a nationwide conversation about the indignities that people of color routinely endured while traveling. "It's like we lanced a boil," Andrea told Derrick as they reviewed the latest social media analytics. "People have been holding these experiences inside, believing they were isolated incidents or that nothing would change if they spoke up. Now they see they're not alone." The movement gained unexpected momentum when James Parker, the Black CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, posted a video describing how he'd been repeatedly mistaken for a flight attendant in first class. "Executive while Black isn't just a hashtag," Parker said in the viral clip. "It's the daily reality of having your presence questioned in spaces where people don't expect to see someone who looks like you." Within days, #Executive while Black had generated over 2 million posts. Prominent Black business leaders, celebrities, and athletes shared their own stories of being profiled, questioned, or removed from premium spaces despite their success and status. The conversation expanded beyond airlines to hotels, restaurants, high-end retail stores, and exclusive clubs. Anywhere that gatekeepers exercised discretion over who belonged and who didn't. The impact on SkyLine's business was immediate and severe. Bookings dropped by 32% in the first month after Derrick's press conference. Corporate clients, sensitive to association with a brand under fire for discrimination, began switching to competitors. The airline's stock price, which had initially weathered the controversy, began a steady decline as the financial implications of the boycott became apparent. SkyLine's competitors sensed opportunity in the crisis. Delta Airlines announced a comprehensive review of its customer service policies to ensure equitable treatment for all passengers. United introduced a new training program developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. Even budget carriers like Southwest and JetBlue issued statements reaffirming their commitment to non-discriminatory practices. Meanwhile, SkyLine's desperate attempts to contain the damage only seemed to make things worse. Their diversity campaign, hastily launched with stock photos and generic commitments to inclusion, was widely mocked for its superficiality. A television commercial featuring smiling black passengers in first class was criticized as tokenism without substance by civil rights leaders. The airline's problems compounded when Bradley Reynolds, the passenger who had taken Derrick's seat, gave an ill-advised interview to a financial news network. Attempting to defend his actions, Reynolds instead revealed his entitlement and bias. "Look, when you spend as much as I do with an airline, you expect certain accommodations," Reynolds told the interviewer. "I'm not saying Washington didn't have a right to be in first class, but there's a way things are done. Some people need to understand the unwritten rules." The backlash was swift and severe. Reynolds' investment firm, facing client outrage and negative publicity, announced his voluntary resignation the following day. A leaked email from the firm's board described his comments as inconsistent with our values and damaging to our reputation. SkyLine's corporate customers continued to distance themselves from the airline. Government agencies, particularly sensitive to discrimination issues, began reviewing their contracts. The Department of Defense, which spent millions annually on travel with SkyLine, announced it would evaluate all available options for future transportation needs. The pressure intensified when flight attendant Jessica Thompson gave an exclusive interview to CNN, describing in detail the Bradley Reynolds protocol and other discriminatory practices she had witnessed during her employment with SkyLine. "We were never explicitly told to discriminate," Jessica explained to Jordan Michaels, the CNN reporter. "It was always couched in terms like customer experience management or VIP accommodation. But the pattern was clear. Certain passengers could demand almost anything, while others were treated as disposable, regardless of their ticket or status." Jessica's interview, combined with the testimony and evidence gathered for the lawsuit, painted a damning picture of SkyLine's corporate culture. Public outrage reached new heights, and calls for accountability extended beyond the airline to its leadership. Warren Phillips, SkyLine CEO, was summoned to testify before a congressional committee investigating discriminatory practices in the transportation industry. His performance proved disastrous. Visibly uncomfortable and poorly prepared, Phillips repeatedly contradicted himself and appeared evasive when confronted with evidence from his own company's documents. "So, Mr. Phillips," Congresswoman Patricia Lee asked during a particularly tense exchange, "are you claiming that you were unaware of these practices, in which case you were incompetent as CEO, or that you were aware and allowed them to continue, in which case you were complicit?" Phillips' stammering response and eventual retreat to, "I don't recall," became instant fodder for late-night comedy shows and social media memes. But for SkyLine's shareholders, there was nothing amusing about the situation. The company's stock had fallen 28% since the congressional hearing, representing a market value loss of $4.2 billion. Major institutional investors began demanding changes. The California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, which held a significant stake in SkyLine, issued a public letter calling for Phillips' resignation and a complete overhaul of the board. Other large shareholders followed suit, creating unprecedented pressure for corporate governance reform. Throughout this period, Derrick Washington maintained a careful balance between advocacy and exploitation. While he continued to speak out about systemic discrimination, he refused numerous endorsement offers and book deals that would have personally profited from the movement he had inadvertently sparked. "This isn't about me," he repeatedly told journalists. "It's about changing a system that allows people to be humiliated based on the color of their skin. My experience was painful, but it's one that countless others have endured without the platform or resources to fight back." Derrick's principled stance enhanced his credibility and moral authority. He became a sought-after speaker at business schools, corporate diversity programs, and civil rights forums. Technova's profile rose accordingly, with potential clients and partners impressed by the company's values as demonstrated through its CEO's actions. The personal cost, however, remained substantial. Derrick's relationship with Sofia Martinez had ended after the strain of public scrutiny proved too much for their partnership. His mother, while proud of his stand, worried constantly about his safety after he received death threats from white supremacist groups angered by his activism. The toll on his health continued as well. During a television appearance, viewers noticed Derrick wincing slightly and touching his temple, signs of the migraines that had become increasingly frequent. His doctor had expressed concern about his blood pressure and stress levels, recommending he step back from the public fight. But Derrick couldn't step back, not when the movement had gained such momentum and the possibility of real change seemed within reach. The lawsuit was proceeding toward trial, SkyLine was finally showing signs of genuine willingness to reform, and the broader conversation about racial equity in customer service had captured national attention. "You need to pace yourself," Jamal cautioned during a rare quiet moment at Technova's headquarters. "This is a marathon, not a sprint." Derrick nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his friend's advice. "I know. But sometimes you get one chance to make real change. I can rest when we've finished what we started." As SkyLine stock continued its downward spiral and the company faced mounting pressure from all sides, the moment of reckoning had arrived. The airline that had once seemed untouchable was now fighting for its very survival. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting that lasted 14 hours. When it ended, SkyLine issued a terse statement announcing the retirement of CEO Warren Phillips and the departure of 5 board members. The company promised sweeping changes to address legitimate concerns about customer treatment and corporate culture. Financial analysts recognized the announcement for what it was, a complete capitulation. SkyLine's market value had plummeted by $4.2 billion since Derrick Washington's removal from Flight 237, a catastrophic loss triggered not by economic factors or competitive pressures, but by the company's own discriminatory practices and stubborn refusal to acknowledge them. The story had evolved from a viral video to a national movement, forcing corporations across America to confront uncomfortable questions about how subtle and not-so-subtle biases shaped their customer service models. What had begun as one man's humiliation had become a watershed moment in the ongoing struggle for equality in everyday American life. As Derrick watched the announcement of Phillips' departure on a television in Technova's conference room, surrounded by his executive team and legal counsel, he felt no sense of personal triumph. Instead, he experienced something more profound, the validation that standing up for dignity and fairness, despite the personal cost, could indeed create meaningful change. "This isn't the end," he told his team quietly. "It's just the beginning." 3 months after Warren Phillips' resignation, Derrick Washington stood in the atrium of SkyLine Airways headquarters, addressing a crowd of employees, journalists, and civil rights leaders. The occasion was the announcement of a historic settlement between SkyLine and the class action plaintiffs, a settlement that would fundamentally transform not just one airline but potentially the entire industry's approach to racial equity. "Today marks not an ending but a beginning," Derrick stated, his voice carrying through the hushed space. "What happened to me and dozens of others was never about one seat on one flight. It was about a system that assigned different values to different people based on the color of their skin." Behind him stood the other named plaintiffs, including Dr. Terrence Howard and Professor Layla Johnson. Beside them was Carolyn Barnes, SkyLine's newly appointed CEO, the first black woman to lead a major U.S. airline. The terms of the settlement were unprecedented in both scope and substance. SkyLine would pay $120 million in compensation to affected passengers, but more significantly, had agreed to a 5-year consent decree mandating comprehensive reforms. First, the airline would implement new training programs developed in partnership with civil rights organizations, with particular emphasis on recognizing and addressing implicit bias. Second, an independent monitoring board would oversee compliance with anti-discrimination policies, with authority to audit practices, investigate complaints, and publish quarterly reports on the company's progress. Third, SkyLine would revamp its customer service metrics to prioritize equitable treatment alongside traditional measures like on-time performance and passenger satisfaction. And perhaps most revolutionary, the airline would restructure its loyalty program to eliminate the shadow preferences that had allowed certain passengers to displace others based on subjective decisions by crew members. "This settlement represents more than justice for past wrongs," Derrick continued. "It establishes a new standard for how corporations must ensure equal treatment for all customers, regardless of race, ethnicity, or appearance. Carolyn Barnes stepped to the microphone next. SkyLine accepts full responsibility for the discriminatory practices that occurred under previous leadership, she stated firmly. We are committed not just to making amends, but to becoming a model for inclusive customer service in the transportation industry. The settlement had far-reaching implications beyond SkyLine. Within weeks, 3 other major airlines announced similar reviews of their policies, eager to avoid becoming the next SkyLine. The Department of Transportation launched an industry-wide investigation into discriminatory practices, using SkyLine's internal documents as a roadmap for identifying problematic patterns. Beyond the corporate reforms, Derrick had made a personal decision about his portion of the settlement funds. Rather than keeping the money, he established the Equity in Transit Foundation, dedicated to researching and addressing discrimination in all forms of transportation, from airlines and trains to rideshare services and taxis. Mobility is fundamental to opportunity, Derrick explained at the foundation's launch event. When people of color can't travel without fear of humiliation or denial of service, their access to education, employment, and advancement is effectively restricted. The Foundation's first initiative was a secure reporting system allowing travelers to document discriminatory experiences through a mobile app, creating a database that could identify patterns across companies and regions. The data would be used not only for advocacy but to develop targeted training programs addressing the most common forms of discrimination. In a particularly meaningful development, Jessica Thompson, the flight attendant whose testimony had been crucial to the case, was hired as the Foundation's Director of Industry Outreach. Her insider knowledge of airline operations proved invaluable in designing practical reforms that could be implemented without disrupting legitimate safety and service protocols. I spent years watching discrimination happen and feeling powerless to stop it, Jessica said during a media interview. Now I'm helping create systems that empower employees to speak up when they witness unfair treatment. Tiffany Clark, who had risked her safety to expose SkyLine's discriminatory practices, received both compensation and recognition for her courage. She was invited to join SkyLine's newly formed Ethics and Inclusion Committee, bringing her perspective as both a former employee and a whistleblower to the airline's reform efforts. In a move that symbolized the company's transformation, Tiffany was appointed Chief of Customer Experience, overseeing the implementation of new service standards across the airline. The old SkyLine would never have listened to someone like me, Tiffany reflected during her first day in the executive offices. The fact that I'm sitting here now, helping reshape the company's approach to customer service, shows how much has changed. Not everyone from the original incident faced such positive outcomes. Thomas Wilson, the head flight attendant who had orchestrated Derrick's removal, was among several employees terminated for their roles in discriminatory incidents. After unsuccessfully suing SkyLine for wrongful termination, Wilson eventually found employment in baggage handling for a regional carrier, a humbling reversal for someone who had once wielded his authority so arrogantly. Bradley Reynolds, whose sense of entitlement had triggered the confrontation, became something of a pariah in business circles. The video of his confrontation with Derrick at the Chicago conference, combined with his disastrous television interview, had rendered him toxic to potential employers and business partners. Reports indicated he had relocated to Florida, attempting to rebuild his investment practice away from the spotlight. For Derrick, the resolution of the SkyLine case brought both professional recognition and personal challenges. Technova had prospered during the controversy, with many clients specifically seeking to partner with a company whose leadership had demonstrated such principled commitment to equity. The acquisition of Quantum AI had proceeded successfully, enhancing Technova's technological capabilities while adding welcome diversity to Silicon Valley's homogeneous landscape. His relationship with Sofia Martinez, however, could not be salvaged. The intense public scrutiny and demands of the legal battle had created a rift that proved impossible to bridge. They parted amicably, with Sofia expressing pride in what Derrick had accomplished even as she acknowledged that their life paths had diverged. Some prices are worth paying, Derrick told Jamal during a rare moment of personal reflection. But that doesn't make them any less painful. 6 months after the settlement, Derrick found himself back on a SkyLine flight, a deliberate choice to experience the airline's transformation firsthand. As he boarded the Atlanta to San Francisco route, the same one from which he had been removed, he was greeted by a flight attendant who recognized him immediately. "Mr. Washington," she said warmly, "it's an honor to have you with us today." As Derrick settled into his first-class seat, he noticed subtle but meaningful changes. The crew's interactions with all passengers were more consistent, regardless of race or appearance. The pre-flight announcements included a clear statement about SkyLine's commitment to respectful and equitable treatment for everyone on board. Midway through the flight, Derrick visited the lavatory and passed by a familiar face, Thomas Wilson, now dressed in the uniform of a baggage handler, traveling as a standby passenger in economy. Their eyes met briefly, Wilson's quickly darting away in recognition and embarrassment. Derrick felt no satisfaction in the man's downfall, only a somber acknowledgement of how choices and accountability shaped human lives. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Derrick gazed out the window at the city where, months earlier, he had been scheduled to finalize the quantum AI acquisition before discrimination derailed his plans. The irony wasn't lost on him. That humiliating incident had delayed but ultimately strengthened Technova's position, while costing SkyLine billions in market value and forcing a complete overhaul of its leadership and culture. The true measure of success, Derrick realized, wasn't the financial settlement or even the specific reforms at SkyLine. It was the ripple effect across corporate America, the recognition that treating people differently based on race wasn't just morally wrong but increasingly costly and unsustainable in a diverse society armed with smartphone cameras and social media platforms. Justice had indeed come with a price tag, $4.2 billion in SkyLine's case, but the value of dignity remained immeasurable. As the wheels touched down on the runway, Derrick felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with his refusal to surrender his rightful seat had transformed not just one airline but potentially an entire industry's approach to racial equity. More importantly, it had inspired countless others to speak up about their own experiences, creating a collective voice too powerful to ignore. Derrick Washington's story teaches us that standing up against discrimination, even at great personal cost, can create meaningful change that extends far beyond a single incident. His refusal to surrender his rightful seat became a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. The power of documentation in the digital age cannot be underestimated. What might have been dismissed as one person's complaint became undeniable when captured on video and shared worldwide. This case demonstrates how systemic discrimination often hides behind policies and customer preferences, revealing itself only when challenged directly. For corporations, the message is clear. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong but financially disastrous, costing SkyLine $4.2 billion in market value. Perhaps most importantly, Derrick's story reminds us that change requires both courage from individuals and accountability from institutions. His strategic approach, gathering evidence, building coalitions, and pursuing both legal and public pressure, offers a blueprint for effective advocacy. True transformation comes not from superficial diversity campaigns but from fundamental changes to systems and cultures that perpetuate bias. As Derrick discovered, the value of human dignity remains immeasurable, and sometimes justice does indeed come with a price tag. What would you do if you experienced discrimination while traveling? Would you speak up like Derrick did or stay silent to avoid confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found Derrick's story inspiring, subscribe to hear more stories of people standing up against injustice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to move when you're exactly where you belong.